Hello Internet! It's Gary again, back with some Wargame Archaeology, but for this one we're not going so far into the past. Looking back to 2001, here's the November-December issue of Strategy and Tactics magazine, Back to Iraq. So of course, this issue came out just after the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, a very famous event which anyone who lived through it remembers very clearly. So the staff of Strategy and Tactics thought it was best to have a look at the possible outcomes and the possible repercussions of that event. Now, I've had a little flick through this magazine yet. I haven't read it fully in depth at all, but I don't actually find any clear mention of those attacks. But as you'll see from the contents, it's very clearly inspired by that. So the game included on this one is Back to Iraq, 3rd edition. And when we get to that, we'll have a look at it. But the first of the articles is Back to Iraq and a strategic analysis. So this goes through the area around, everything that's really happened there since the late 80s, 90s, the breakdown of the Iraqi army, things about Saddam Hussein, his health, the WMDs that he's suspected of building, a complete breakdown of all the forces around Afghanistan at that time as well, and what strategies they think might be useful against Saddam. So a real in-depth look at that entire corner of the Middle East, and a conflict which, although depicted here in 2002, didn't in real life start till 2003, but was clearly on the cards from the minute those towers got attacked. There's a little update on Afghanistan, a little detail of terrorist organisations in that part of the world, some documentation on the rise of the Taliban. So a breakdown of Osama bin Laden himself, where he come from, what led him to his actions. So it's going to be really interesting reading. And they've also got something a bit more historical of other goings on in Afghanistan. So the British wars in there from the 1830s, the early 1900s, all up into today. But then we get to the game, which is the real meat and bones of any strategy and tactics magazine, in my opinion. And it's a very interesting game that comes with 2 scenarios. Some things played out in real life, but of course, this was a pre-war prediction of how things would play out, and they didn't get everything right. But I'll move this away for a second, I'll just show you the map. I'm not on my usual table, so I can't really get it all in with where the tripod is, but as you can see, here's the main map itself. It covers all of Iraq here. North is up this way. We've got Iran sweeping down here, Turkey, Syria, Saudi Arabia down the corner. Little areas of Kuwait, the Persian Gulf. So, but Iraq is the clear focus, and Baghdad is almost dead centre. So you can already see where this is entirely based around. There isn't much in the way of charts on the map itself, unlike some magazine games. All you really have is a terrain key, the turn record track standard, and this is the MIPS track, and that is the Militant Islamic Prestige Points track. So the coalition, the US anti-terrorist forces, they win by taking Baghdad, I believe, and keeping that MIPS level down to a certain level. And the MIPS points are what the militant Islamic player is aiming for. That's that's them building up kudos in the area. So all in all, it's a very simple map design, very clean, very clear. Each of the hexes is very well delineated, but being obvious what part of the world it is. And I think it's not what I'd call an attractive design. It doesn't have that late 80s feel that I really like to the simple designs, but it's really it's really playable because there's no ambiguity there, which I do like. I'm going to fold this up and we'll have a little look at the rules and the counters. So the rules are your basic fare, and it's a little breakdown of how to read the NATO symbols included in the game. A little bit of talk about the first scenario. So the first scenario is just the coalition forces attacking Iraq and the Al-Qaeda insurgents within. There's also a second scenario where you're not just attacking Iraq, it's what if Iran saw the writing on the wall, thought, oh, Iraq's being attacked, we're obviously next, let's join up, and it becomes coalition versus Iraq and Iran. The rules, you've got your basics, and you've got, with the large hexes each being 17 miles, and the counters generally being like, divisions or battalions, they're large formations. You've got things like the zones of control, your supply lines, they really matter. This is more on the strategic side than the tactical. Yeah, standard things about, movement, different types of terrain. What is interesting is here they've got rules in here for not just weather, but also chemical warfare, use of nuclear weapons by the Islamists, things that didn't actually happen in the real world, but were significant threats, or seen to be significant threats at the time. And there's even more advanced game rules where you're adding in airstrike, strategic targets, more surveillance things. And when you get down to it, it's got got a combat results table for the coalition forces, CRT for the militants, and a terrain effects chart. The charts themselves are very limited, so I haven't read through the rules in depth, so I'm not sure if that means I'm going to be flicking through them because there's not much in the way of player aids. I think might be constantly checking things, or if it's simple enough that the counters on these couple of charts is enough. Well, I have to see how that goes out. But let's have a little look at the counter sheet. So this is the counter sheet that's included with the game. I've got it at this angle to try and keep the shine off it from my lighting. But, standard there, about 5/8 inch counters, 5/8 of an inch. And it covers all sorts of different forces. These red and black ones are, I believe, for the Iraqi forces. The grey and black are the Iranians. You've got US forces, UK forces from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all these little coalitions that help out. You've got all sorts of aircraft here, including what looks to be the AWACS, with the big old radar dish on the top, which I do like the look of. You've got counters here for when the nuclear strikes and the chemical weapon strikes have. And these yellow ones, they are all the strategic targets. So if you look at the reverse side, you'll see there like things like hostages, radar, sites, some kind of transmitters, intel. So that comes in with the airstrike rules, I believe, from what I've glanced over so far. Overall, they seem to be very nice counters. They're quite clearly printed. The registration of the die cut is really well. Being a magazine game, they're quite thin. It's a bit on the flimsy side for counters, but that's what you get with a magazine game. The fact that they're so legible and they're so clearly cut, I can't wait to get them punched and rounded. I think they'll look really, really lovely when they're all play ready. Back in the magazine, once we've got the rules section, which is, as usual, all in one big section in the middle, so I can just unfold the stables and pull out the rule book to itself. There's a variant game for one of the earlier strategy and tactics games with some more Afghanistan rules. A couple of adverts for other games you can purchase. And one thing that's really telling is there's an article here about a day that will live in infamy about the Pearl Harbor attacks. And this really reflects how the World Trade Center attacks were seen at the time. They were as shocking, as indicative of the start of a war as the Pearl Harbor was. And although like I said, they've never actually, I don't think the words Two Towers or World Trade Center are anywhere in this magazine, but there was no missing the subtext throughout it. When you see the publication date and everything that follows, you'd have to be an idiot not to see it, or ignorant of history. But yeah, so there's a good, interesting talk on Pearl Harbor and what that led to. And there's a final article about the Soviet war in Afghanistan against the Mujahideen, in the 80s. So there's a breakdown of the forces involved, how the different maps of how the situation looked at different parts of the war from the 79 to 85. So quite standard strategy and tactics fare, but I think it'll be a very interesting read. Especially an interesting read if you're planning on picking up Flying Pig Games 85, which I keep seeing and I keep toying with buying. So this could be some interesting research for that purchase. And that's it for that magazine. But from what I've seen of this game, it looks really interesting. I've also seen on BGG, there's someone who's made about 8-10 years ago, they took the counters and the map from this game and made a actual historical scenario, which is closer to how the real war played out in 2003. So once I've got the counters punched and clipped, I'm gonna play the first scenario at least of this, and I'm gonna check out that historical scenario and see how it goes. So until next time, happy gaming.